Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning from sunny and warm Helsinki. This is the 10th and final session in our global webinar series on internationalization of higher education in the COVID-19 era. To all who have attended our earlier sessions this past year, and to those attending now for the first time, tervetuloa, a warm welcome. My name is Terhi Mölsä. I'm the CEO of the Fulbright Finland Foundation, and it is my privilege to serve as your host. This final session of the series combines two critical topics that are particularly important for us here in Finland: sustainable partnerships and the Arctic. We focus today on future areas for collaboration, successes in developing multidisciplinary partnerships in the Arctic region, and on sharing experiences, innovative examples, and concrete tips, the do's and don'ts, if you will, for developing collaboration. We also have an interactive networking element, partnership speed dating, as a way to meet other participants and discuss potential future collaborations in an informal small group environment. We have registrants from 12 countries, and the participant list is quite diverse, with individuals joining us from the Finnish and US governments, the European Commission, and from universities around the world, including researchers, students, deans, and international admissions specialists. Thank you for bringing your own unique perspective into the discussion and for joining us in co-creating this event. It is such a pleasure, both professionally and personally, to introduce today's impressive lineup of speakers with whom we have had the privilege and joy to collaborate for many years. Kirsi Latola is research coordinator at the Thule Institute at the University of Oulu here in Finland. She's chair of European Polar Board and the University of the Arctic vice president for networks. Greg Poelzer is professor at the School of Environment and Sustainability at the University of Saskatchewan in Canada. He was a 2015 Fulbright Arctic Initiative Scholar and now serves as the co-lead scholar in the current 2021 Fulbright Arctic Initiative Program. And Michael Srega is the director of the Polar Institute and director of the Global Risk and Resilience Program at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Kirsi, Greg, Mike, we are absolutely delighted to have you with us. And moderating is our foundation's Assistant Director of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives and our resident internationalization scholar, Lisa Weimer. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to our entire events team here in Helsinki. Finally, I want to convey our appreciation to our partners in this webinar series for the collaboration throughout this past year: the USA Study Abroad Office of the US State Department and the Association of International Education Administrators. It is with a sincere thank you that I now turn it over to the Chief of USA Study Abroad, Heidi Manley.
Wonderful. Terhi, thank you so much. And we thank you and your team for being such great partners, as well as AIEA on this webinar series, noting, as you mentioned, incredibly, that this is the last in our series on internationalization of higher education in the COVID-19 era. What an educational and enlightening experience it has been for me, and I am so grateful to our partners for chancing this experiment with us. On behalf of my USA Study Abroad team at the US Department of State, welcome and thank you all for joining us for this event focused on sustainable partnerships in the Arctic. As Secretary of State Antony Blinken said a few weeks ago, we're committed to advancing a peaceful Arctic region where cooperation prevails on climate, the environment, science and safety, and where sustainable economic development benefits the people of the region themselves. The Arctic is more than a strategically or economically significant region. It's home to our people. It is our responsibility to protect that peaceful cooperation and to build on it as neighbors and as partners. One key way we can do this is through our educational partnerships and our shared commitment to addressing global challenges together. We all have a determination to build stronger university partnerships. In our globally connected world, international education is more important than ever, and we need vibrant and creative partnerships to work across borders to address our world's most pressing issues. There are so many of us at the US Department of State and in higher education institutions across the world working so hard to support the next generation of diverse leaders and the creation of a bright future for international exchanges and study abroad. To support this great effort, I am thrilled to be joined by our incredible experts across the region to help us as we think about new partnerships in the Arctic, but perhaps more importantly, how we can be strategic in those partnerships. I will note that when we were brainstorming over this webinar a couple of months ago, our speakers today were our dream team for this event. They are all incredibly busy professionals, and we had crafted a number of alternative scenarios with the inevitability that one or more of these speakers would be unable to participate. It was an incredible day when we heard that all three of them had accepted, and we are all thrilled and a bit stunned to have them with us here today. Thank you all for being here. We are excited by your presence with us, as well as the conversations we'll have with our participants and the connections we will all make. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Lisa, to kick off our event. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome and introductory remarks. I'm Lisa Weimer, the Assistant Director of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives at the Fulbright Finland Foundation. A big hello from Helsinki to everyone. This webinar is discussion-based with an innovative and creative interactive element. First, the speakers will have a discussion about Arctic partnerships, and then we will jump into an experiment, partnership speed dating, where you will have 20 minutes to meet others interested and working on research and projects in the Arctic region. After that, we'll come back to the larger group and continue our discussion with the speakers, at which point you, as the participants, can ask questions. So a few housekeeping tips before getting started. Before we jump into the discussion, can you make sure that your Zoom name tag displays your first and last name? If you need help with this, you can click on the participants icon at the bottom of your screen. And next to your name, you can click More and rename. Throughout the webinar, you are welcome to use the chat function that's also at the bottom of your screen to interact and connect with other participants. I already see that there are a few individuals who have said hello from around the globe. So if you'd like to say a quick hello, let everyone know where you're coming from and what organization you're from. And just a note, the discussions with the speakers will be recorded today and will be available on our website after the event. The partnership speed dating session will not be recorded. So going forward, we kindly ask you to mute yourself and turn off your video before getting started. And then the second discussion, when we come back, we will ask everyone to put your videos on and ask questions. So let's go ahead and dive into the discussion. The speakers, Kirsi, Greg, and Mike, if you'd like to turn on your videos and unmute yourself. So in this webinar series, we have discussed how this Corona pivot that we have all had to do this last year has impacted and shaped various aspects of higher education internationalization. Today, we will talk about a very important topic, sustainable Arctic partnerships. And Kirsi, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this first. Let's begin discussing why international collaborations are important for the Arctic region.
Thank you, Lisa, and greetings from Oulu, which is also very hot today, as whole Finland. I think I'll start by stating that the Arctic is very diverse, as we all know. It means that we don't have any single organization or any single researcher who would know it all. So when you work and collaborate with other organizations, other researchers, other partners, you get much more holistic view. You get a better understanding of the whole of the Arctic. So basically, together we are much stronger. What is also very good to think about in this connection is obviously, of course, that when you pool your resources, which are very often sometimes very small and narrow, sometimes much more broader, you have much more a larger pool of resources, both in economic way, both in knowledge information and people's understanding of the region. And also, if you think about scientific terms, you have much more broader disciplinaries, and you can work in interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, whatever. So I think that that's the whole core in the partnerships. And I think that within the Arctic, which is now facing a huge problem with climate change and globalizations, working together is super important.
Mike and Greg, do either of you want to add to this?
You bet. I couldn't agree more with Kirsi. And one of the things which you can achieve more together is one of the big challenges, of course, across the Arctic is capacity and human capacity, sometimes financial capacity. And what ends up happening through these collaborations, you can overcome challenges what locally that might be capacity by linking up with other partners, and together not only do you meet those capacity needs, but often the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I think what Kirsi said is absolutely true.
Maybe I'll just follow up on that. Both my colleagues covered the core of it, but I would also say that partnerships allow us to think a little bit differently, right? The different perspectives. And so as we have watched the Arctic transform in a very short period of time, we're dealing with a lot of different issues, social, cultural, political, on and on. And I think these powerful networks, the partnerships, allow us to think about the Arctic in different ways and then connect the Arctic to non-Arctic areas. And I think that's really important. So it's not so much about the technique, maybe we'll get into that later, the creation of the partnerships, maybe we'll get into that later, but just the idea of us collectively bringing our collective knowledge of the Arctic, the different Arctics that we all live in, those who don't live in the Arctic, giving them an opportunity to understand the Arctic and have this free flow of information not only informs what will happen in the future, kind of the contours of what the next Arctic looks like, but also putting the Arctic into some context here as we watch it evolve before our eyes. I think that's a really important thing, and having all of those inputs and then all of the outputs are really important for a whole lot of issues that maybe we can go into later. Not, thinking about the tie between education and policy and education, research driving policy, informing citizenship, all these things that maybe we'll get into during our speed dating.
Yep.
Yeah, and Mike, I want to come back to one point that you just made. You had said, even individuals in like the non-Arctic member states. So I'm just curious to hear how do we collectively have partnerships with the Arctic 8 states if, say, we're not from one of those nations? What's the role of those interested individuals in non-Arctic member states?
Both Kirsi and Greg will weigh in on this, but I have found in the last 5 years, maybe 10, but certainly last 5, the interest from non-Arctic states, whether it be China, Singapore, Japan, you name it, right? Whether in Europe or Asia or wherever, the Caribbean, they see a tie here. It's not just the new kid on the block and they want to know something about it. They actually see opportunity, and the fact that they are inherently linked to the Arctic, whether it's driven by climate, economics, politics, security, they see it. And we're watching institutions, universities, organizations look for information and look for seeking out actively partners to inform their curriculum, but also different ways that their organizations or individuals can think about what they do, whether it's in their classroom or in policy development. So they're watching the Arctic evolve, and they're trying to not catch up to it, but understand it and then link their work to it, which I think is really healthy.
But if I may continue on that idea, is that we also have to remember that we have strong countries, particularly in Europe, who have studied Arctic a long time. It was Netherlands who found Svalbard. So it's something that is in the history and in the heritage of the many countries to do research in the Arctic particularly. And I think that when Lisa was asking that how people could actually connect from outside the Arctic with the Arctic researchers or Arctic organizations. We do have a lot of these international organizations that do work with also non-Arctic countries, like International Arctic Science Committee, which has members, I think something like 26, 28. I don't remember exactly how many countries. So through all those, you can of course link and find new partners in working that. But we have to kind of remember that even though there's a lot of discussion, particularly in Europe at the moment, on how we should make the Arctic research stronger within and from the Arctic countries by themselves. But we also have to remember that there's a lot of researchers, very good researchers from all the other countries as well, who have been in the Arctic and done research for a long time and very good at that as well. So they are putting a lot of funding as well on that.
The other thing I would add to both my colleagues' observations is the importance of networking and connecting with outside the Arctic for tackling global issues. And to take an example, an area I'm working in right now around renewable energy, we have close to 1 billion people on this planet who do not have electricity, and about another billion that are electrically islanded or on weak ties. And one of the interesting things, the Arctic, just because of its history, has a lot of experience in microgrids and off-grid communities and how do you do electricity service delivery. And what we're finding is there's a tremendous amount of interest in the story of what's going on in the Arctic and how places like Alaska, which has been a global leader, and where this is moving in Canada, of course, biomass in places like Finland, very sustainable energy systems, but connecting that with the rest of the world. And we used to think of the Arctic sometimes as exceptional, that the problems and so on were just unique to the Arctic. And we're finding it's obviously that's simply not true. But the interest over the last couple of years has almost become seamless. It's almost become natural that these kind of connections and knowledge transfers back into the region, and very importantly outside of the region, are becoming almost mainstream now. We're moving in that direction. Other area is with the global energy challenge and the demands around electricity. Large cities are starting to have to microgrid now. So large, and who would have thought that the examples from rural Alaska are going to be critically important for places like New York. And this is a tremendously exciting period of time for the Arctic. But it's not only going to be becoming natural, but fundamentally necessary as we're trying to tackle some of these big global challenges that are confronting the world.
Maybe, Lisa, if it's okay, I'll just add one point to that, and then I know you want to move on, but I think we have all benefited. We've all benefited from decades long working in the Arctic, right? We have, and I think that carried us through the pandemic. And here's what I mean by it. All of us are related to UArctic. We all obviously have links to Fulbright and State Department. We all have met over the years, and our careers have evolved as the organizations that we worked within evolved. And they required us there was just no way to do our work without having this relationship. It started over telephones, literally landlines. And now we have evolved to this, excuse me. So, we were there already. And I think that has benefited us because you can have Arctic Council, UArctic, on and on. It's already there. And what we have seen is the leveraging, not just of the technology and the opportunity, but these friendships that have lasted for decades. And I know other parts of the world have these as well. But for the Arctic, it's been mandated to us that we work like this. It's just in our DNA now. And it carried us through the pandemic, because who did we call when everything shut down? We called colleagues across the globe to keep our work going. And so I think that's another thing that the Arctic has going for it. And we, in some ways, we're ahead of the game. We could talk about bandwidth and broadband and all those things, which are a whole other hurdle for us. But I just don't want to lose sight the fact that we were already a team, a group that had common mission, vision, goals, and that's carried us through. And now it's lovely to see lots of other friends come in from Arctic and non-Arctic states, and those who have never worked in the Arctic before, not just for the content, but they've also brought their friendship and their backgrounds and their expertise into this world.
Exactly. Well said.
Yeah, there's actually a comment here in the chat that I just want to highlight. Jean Sasso says, Arctic is connected to us all, whether on a beach in Caribbean or mid-continent Asia, we are one planet.
Yes.
You're here.
Well, I want to go, this whole webinar series is focused on how the pandemic has shaped internationalization. And so I want to dive a little bit deeper with the pandemic and what the impact has been on the Arctic and the Arctic collaborations. So what are your thoughts? How has the pandemic impacted and shaped the Arctic region, and more specifically, Arctic collaborations across borders? Does anyone want to take a first launch of this one?
I could actually start by sharing what we have done within UArctic, because Mike started to talk about UArctic, and as you know, I work a lot for UArctic. And within the UArctic, we have groups that we call thematic networks who work on the same research agenda or problem faced. We have 61 of those at the moment. And we did a year ago a survey, a questionnaire with all those thematic networks on how they have handled the COVID-19 situation. Because all these networks are based on collaboration and cooperation. They do joint research, joint education activities, and other type of things. And as an outcome of that survey, I was very surprised to hear that there were much more positive remarks. Obviously, there were some who had to cancel their activities. But overall, the outcome was that because we are all now working from home and we are not able to travel, we are now able to meet much more often. It's much more equal to all our partners because they can join us webinars and online. Also for students to join in online courses, they don't need to pay a lot of money to travel or spend one day traveling first to the city and second day to traveling from capital city to other country and so on. And also something that we already discussed actually before this webinar with Greg and Mike, which is also something that people have said that now when all the professors and researchers and people who you would not never get to the same place at the same time, you can actually get those, and you are building much more partnerships and much more broader networks because you are connecting to the online views. So that was one thing that was very positive. It's much more equal now because people can participate through the online means. Then I want to point out the second thing. Actually, Greg can follow this because I know that Greg has done the same kind of a thing. If you think about the research, obviously none of the researchers, or maybe not none, but almost none, were not able to travel last summer and last field season to do out any of the research. I'm a natural scientist as a background, so I follow particularly on that as well. And what we found out and what I learned was that a couple of and several of researchers were actually conducting their research by connecting the local communities or local tourism companies or local industries who actually did the research for themselves. And that is a new way of doing the Arctic research as well, so that you don't necessarily need to travel there by yourself, but if possible, you can connect the locals who are already there and have a much smaller carbon footprint and environmental impact. And I know that Greg has done the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. Yeah. Kirsi, we did that up in Northern Canada, like in the Mackenzie Delta, where we had youth doing the interviews and so on, socially distant or through social media and so on connections. And that worked remarkably well. So that's one of those silver linings that I know in a previous conversation Heidi had alluded to, and that's been really, really important. So there's been I agree, there's tremendous things what we can actually accomplish and actually be more efficient and move things forward. But the other side of it is one of the things the pandemic has also done, though, is focused, I think, or exposed some vulnerabilities as well in the Arctic. And these are things like supply chains. So if you, for example, in Northern Canada, if you have to get foodstuffs and other materials to communities that are flying in. What happens if a technician that's maintaining aircraft and so on gets COVID, or a store manager gets COVID and so on, those supply chains can break down. And what it does is, I think, redoubles, I think, our priorities and efforts, both as a research community, but as policymakers and so on, in how do we make those communities more robust? Because that just became very naked and self-evident where some of those challenges are. But the exciting thing is, I come back, whether it's on food security issues, whether it's energy security, what are the systems as we're going forward in this global transition to make those more robust? So from that perspective, these are new opportunities to build greater sustainability at the local level as well.
And perhaps, Liz, what I'll say is, just to amplify what Kirsi and Greg just said, is that amplifying was the word I've been searching for, is that COVID amplified everything, to the good or to the bad. And for, like with Greg, Alaska, my home, we saw that amplified in communities that relied on small planes for mail, for drugs, internet connectivity that didn't exist all that well beforehand, just to get basic information to small health clinics. It really amplified the haves and the have-nots. And if many of us were talking about the digital divide before, I would say that we now have, it teased out the fact that, this is lovely when you have great connections, right? This is great. Sure. But in many places in the North, there's a digital abyss, not a gap. Yeah. And if we were highlighting that beforehand, I'm giving too many examples here, but if we're highlighting that beforehand, that highlight really went to like a heat lamp on many issues. Yeah. I actually like that line. I'm going to use that. It's a heat lamp on the issues that Greg is talking about, which is the role of educators. I mean, that is a perfect place for us to be thinking about our service to society, whether it's in the classroom or elsewhere. So that's that. So even though this is brought about, we can get a foreign minister to join us for 10 minutes. That's fantastic. But there's the other side of this, which is there's still the haves and the have-nots, which stymies education, social justice, all the way through the economic supply chain. But the basic economies of the North require us to have, just as good broadband internet as everywhere else in the world.
Yeah, exactly, Mike. We just had a Arctic youth panel during the UArctic Congress, and we were not able to get our Russian youth there because he was in a very remote village. But he sent a video to us that we showed. And in that video, he speaks really nicely. He's a young reindeer herder, I think from somewhere in Shaha. So he's a Evenki, he's an indigenous person, and he spoke that he would really love to have an education, but he doesn't have a chance to have that. So it boils into the problem of how we get the broadband, how we get the connection to work in all these places where it's still missing. Arctic is so diverse that we often forget that there's big cities and then we have all these smaller communities. So that's important.
Yeah, and there's a comment in chat again, as miserable and tragic as COVID has been for many people, COVID-19 presents us with extraordinary opportunities. Individuals and groups that are ready with anti-fragility, people, process, tech, content, practices can evolve and excel. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I kind of threw mine out in the chat. I think it's a very good point. And this is the part, it is a challenge ahead, but also a tremendous opportunity. But sometimes too, when we're thinking about this, where we have had to overcome these kind of challenges, and it is an opportunity, then it's also important beyond the Arctic. And you only have to look at the Indian subcontinent to look how COVID has been just absolutely devastating now, in how that's affecting rural India and so on. And again, these kind of lessons that can be shared across the different regions of the globe in terms of building more sustainable communities, and to talk about, as Mike said, this big chasm that we have between the have and have-nots is not just within the Arctic, but there's an opportunity within the Arctic because of most are industrialized countries, of course, that are wealthy and have resources to to address that, so that some of these lessons may be exportable, as well as learning how other parts of the world with fewer resources have been able to attack these kind of vulnerability issues. And I couldn't agree more, a great opportunity here.
Great. Well, we are coming close to speed dating. And so this is really, the interactive aspect of this webinar, and we're trying something new. So before we kind of get there, I'd like to switch gears just a little bit and have a conversation with all of you about practical tips. So as you're starting to think about, collaboration in the Arctic region, potential new partners, how do you create new Arctic partnerships, first of all? And do you have any practical tips of how to get that conversation started?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
What I would say is I have found the pandemic has shown me this. I've been amazed at how many people have called, either somehow they've got my cell phone or sent me a note, and not sheepishly, but tentatively, right? Very tentative in the conversation about, I'd like to talk to you about, you don't know me, I'd like to talk to you about X, whatever that might be. And some of these things, I have a course, I have a program, I'm thinking about whatever it is. But really tentative, and it doesn't need to be tentative, right? Some were junior faculty, some were seniors, some were whomever, but and I've said the same thing to them as I will say now. It's kind of like Nike, just do it. In the North and elsewhere in the world, obviously, but we're talking about the North here. It's an amazing thing because as much as you need that help, people want to offer the help or the insights, and they will tell you, here's where I succeeded. And they're more than willing to tell you about their list of failures, because I got a long list of those and I'm willing to share. But I would say that at least in the North, and again, I'm sure it's elsewhere, is that just make the call, just send the email. Even if you think your idea is kind of interesting and I don't know, not even developed, the ability to talk to people who have had long times of success and failure, who have had career ladders that have been, exceptional. There's still this very grounded, I find, mostly very grounded sense of self within the North, and the sense of we're in this together, and the sense that it requires us to pay forward because others helped us, right? Whether it was on an audio conference years ago or whatever. So my biggest tip is just do it, and don't take anything off the board. The North has always been a place of experiencing, experimenting, and risk. It's a frontier, right? So carry that through. It's a frontier. Take on the risk, take on the ideas, and you will find a lot of colleagues will rally around you. And by the way, they will provide for you their Rolodex, their network. It will be a network of networks that people would like to share with you.
Yeah, so people are really, really keen on collaborating. And I think that being friendly and polite and respectful is always a good thing when you approach the people. Sometimes you also could think about that if you want to approach new people and you have a question, so you want to ask something, you might think that what is it actually for them, so that there's a mutual benefit. You actually collaborate instead of just throwing something to you, because it doesn't harm to be a respectful, to be a polite and nice. Like Mike was saying, the people in North are generally very nice, and when we are very keen on collaborating. So don't be shy.
Yeah, my one practical tip is to be practical, and when you're looking at, and this heightens again, think how many Zoom meetings are on, how many things we're doing, but the thing that drives most folks are problems and looking at solution-based approaches, which often are almost trying to solve a practical problem. And when you do that, and I'm thinking how effective webinars like this one today has proven to be over the past year, and where those kind of conversations have a practical focus, you can do exactly what Mike and Kirsi are saying and affect that true collaborative spirit of problem solving together. And you'd be surprised how quickly those barriers break down. So that's my practical tip. Be practical.
Yeah, and there's a comment here from Ami Salmi, and she says, I've been meeting with international colleagues much more often during the COVID-19 times. Virtuality is also a possibility. So perhaps that has opened some lines for new collaborations. And how do you, I mean, for someone who is really interested in the Arctic and wants to get involved, what kind of tips do you have for them? I mean, if they're not connected, if they, you know, people aren't going to conferences right now. So how do you make that initial connection with somebody?
You know, so here's been my experience this past year for what it's worth. What ends up happening is whether it's an embassy of one of our countries or this kind of a opportunity, and you see those pop up in our mailboxes and so on. I can't overstate how important these kind of webinars really are. And they come up typically in thematic areas, whether it's in health, whether it's in energy, whether it's climate issues, whether it's food issues. There's a whole variety of these things. But just jump in, and again, back to Mike's point, no need to be tentative. And there's been a number of people who have not been tentative, and those things are really percolating and going forward. We've had a number of those happen. So yeah, again, I'm slightly repeating myself on that front, Lisa, but I think that is really the lesson over this past year, that people can. And you know what I'm finding is sometimes before, when we used to meet face to face, I'd say 20 years ago, the Arctic felt sometimes was more of an exclusive club. And I think that's gone now. In those kind of areas. Yeah, I think that's gone. And that's a massive change in terms of Arctic relations, that we really see ourselves as a giving and receiving part of the global community.
And one very practical guideline would be that there are all these organizations like the University of the Arctic. And if you go to University of Arctic website, you find the list of the UArctic members, where you have also contacts. You find a list of the thematic networks and their contacts. The International Arctic Social Science Association and Arctic Science Council, who all have also the working groups and list of people who you could contact. And if you are a student, APEX, the Association Polar Early Career Scientist, is a very good place to find the collaborators. So by looking all through these existing websites, you can always find contacts. And by contacting one, you can always get contacts to the other people, and you kind of spread out. So that's the one kind of a practical thing if you don't know anyone who to contact.
Yeah, so as we kind of prepare to go into this speed dating round, I do want to highlight, so there's this conversation going on in chat. Our last webinar, we also experimented with these speed dating rounds, and it looks like there was some success here. It says on our last speed dating event, our district in Florida connected with Oulu University in Finland to discuss teacher training and mentoring. So you can already see that, you know, this plants a seed. So let's see what we can do today with our experiment with connecting individuals in these breakout rooms. What I'd like to do now is we will pause the recording. And now we want to open it up to a discussion. So if you have a question that you would like to raise, you can raise your hand, or you can also type it in the chat. I did see that there was a question earlier from Alec Aiken, and this was the question: building local research capacity is essential, but is predicated on good relations with communities that require long-term commitments to reciprocal information exchange. Do our funding organizations appreciate the need to support regular communications? For example, face-to-face community visits with our partner communities over several or many years. Do any of the speakers have some thoughts on this?
I can talk a little bit, at least.
Oh, great. Your microphone is still going in and...
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. Let's see. I'll try and switch this up if it works better. Is that any better?
Yeah. Audio from
Okay.
the computer. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. No, so I was just going to say in the more recent Canadian context, I think that message that in Alec within Canada has been actually a national champion for that with the funding agencies. And I think that message is actually starting to come through. And I look at some of the more recent grants, not just here, but I see that also in Scandinavia as well, that understanding acceptance that this is a long-term process of relationship building and creating that runway and the funding space to do that. So I'm pleased where the direction is going over the last few years. It seems to having a lot of momentum, but that has been a long time in coming. And I know where Alec has been on that, because within Canada, just to put a plug for Alec, frankly, he's been just a tireless champion for that. And it is essential. But one of the good things to build off that, where there is those long-term relationships and trust already built, they also lower transaction costs for international collaboration, where you have networks that have those trusts, and the people that are the links can actually lower the transaction costs, so you can have those sharing between communities. The project we're involved in is actually building sister communities with Alaska, Canada, Norway, Sweden. And that wouldn't be possible without exactly those kind of relationships Alec is talking about.
Great. And I see here, there's actually a question from Andrew Lee, wondering if there's an attendee list, including email addresses and areas of interest that might circulate. And yes, when you all registered, there were a lot of questions about your areas of interest and a short bio about yourself and email addresses. And if you check the little box that said that you consent to share your information with others, then you will be receiving that in a follow-up email. So that's good news. Yeah. All right. So what other questions do we have for the speakers? If we don't have anything, I'm really curious, Mike, to hear from you. You have some thoughts on what are the future drivers impacting the Arctic region. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks. So some of you have no doubt seen this before, but in terms of educating, I struggled when I first got to DC to communicate to members of Congress and the administration and others about, first of all, where the Arctic is, why it's important, and why they should care. And even in my testimonies to Congress, I'd have to spend a lot of time working through that, and why the U.S. would have any interest, and why it's a really important international space. And then one night, I started thinking about all the key drivers at play in the Arctic, and they all seem to start with the letter C. And if they didn't start with a C, I made them start with the letter C. So I came up with frankly, a shtick to get at least a hook into the issue of why you should care about the Arctic. And it's not perfect, but it provides buckets for people to think about. So Congressman X or politician Y or policymaker Z is thinking, it's too big, which is what I've heard. The Arctic, it's like climate change. Mike, it's too big. I don't know what to do with it. I don't understand it, but I know it's important and I got to do something with it. How do I break it down into buckets? And so I created these 7 buckets, all starting with a C. And the hook is navigating the Arctic's 7 Cs, because to me, there are 7 key drivers, and there are 7 key drivers. You can have 12 Qs or 11 Ls or whatever the number is, but navigating the Arctic 7 Cs has seemed to catch, and I've used it, and it's interchangeable, and it is not perfect. But to me, the principal driver, and it's kind of how I make presentations now, regardless of who I speak to, the principal driver is climate, right? And you go through all of what we know about what's happening in climate and their impacts, and you can maneuver that. And climate drives this issue about commodities, oil, gas, strategic minerals, and it's a whole portfolio of things. It's almost like creating a class. I almost made like an outline to a syllabus, really. The third is commerce. To me, that's shipping. So if you want to talk about shipping or issues related to commerce, that's the third C at play, driving this Arctic issue. And again, it's not perfect, but it allows you a place to put in different pieces, and it's been very helpful to me. The fourth C is connectivity in all their forms: broadband, ports, rails, you name it, including this kind of connectivity, educational, partnerships. The fifth C is communities in all their aspects, right? Whether they're threatened, thriving, at risk, whatever that is, but communities allows us to speak about a lot of things within that community bucket. The sixth C is cooperation, right? There are some people who think the Arctic is the Wild West, when in fact, we do have governing regimes. There's a lot of cooperation that happens like this, and you can go through all the organizations, particular issues, everything from Fulbright to do whatever. There's cooperation there, and people always are astounded about how much cooperation there is. And then the seventh C is competition, right? And that's real, and that is national security issues. Those are hard security issues, but it's also economic competition, right? But the 6 C's, I try to balance the 7th C, because right now the 7th C, this idea of competition and militarization of the North and conflict and ratcheting up of activities and things like that, seems to dominate it does dominate at least the narration here in DC, but the other 6 temper the 7th, but we should be eyes wide open. So I've been using that, and it's had utility. Other people are using it, which is great. But to me, it just helps frame. We could take this discussion and use the C's and find that we would have a lot to talk about in a lot of those areas. So Lisa, I don't know if I did what you asked to do, but I will tell you that for me, it's driving a lot of what we do, how we do it, especially in this town and abroad.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mike. We also put the link to Mike's article in the chat if you want to reference it. So that should be there.
Yeah, that's when candidate Biden was running, and now he's President Biden. So I may have made him mad, and that wouldn't be a good thing.
No, but to put a plug for Mike, I'm only ever going to say something nice about Mike once, so this is it. But it's an exceptionally well-written piece, and quite frankly, in terms of science diplomacy, I think it's frankly it's just a master stroke what you did with that, Mike. And there's other areas we're working with, and I really encourage people to take a look at what Mike put together.
Great. And I see that Jean had a question earlier. Jean, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
We're talking about what Greg had said in our breakout. Was that what you were referring to, Lisa?
Yeah, you also say leading practices. What's a theme or project that we can start working on today?
Right. And so after I said that, I was recalling what Greg had said, and Greg, please jump in and here on this or whatever. I was looking for a project that I could focus my group on, my it's all about Jean, like how I can go back to work and I can make something happen quickly today, tomorrow, focused on the Arctic. And Greg came up with 2 really, really good ideas. So Greg, they're your ideas. Please tell us more about it.
No, just flying out. It was coming out of that whole discussion we had around some of these vulnerabilities around food security, energy security, and there's tremendous opportunities to work on those things. And Jean, you should talk a little bit about what you're doing at MIT, because there's other folks on the call I think would be benefit tremendously of what you guys are up to.
Yeah, just really, really briefly, I manage a consortium. It's called the Make Impact Consortium. You can find that MIT Make Impact Consortium. I put my LinkedIn link in the chat as well. I organize universities around the world to connect with businesses and public sector organizations to help students focus in on sort of like 4 areas, which the acronym is DIME. It's design, innovation, maker spaces, and entrepreneurship. We put together challenges and competitions. We generate content. We focus people, process, content, technology on those things. Give it to college students. Give them a design problem, The next one I think I'm going to do is about sustainability. I'd love to focus it on the Arctic. That's one of my goals, and give that challenge to students. Give them 6 to 8 weeks to figure out what they want to work on, come up with a product or a service or process that they think will attack that problem, and you get just amazing outcomes from that kind of work. And again, it's a collaboration. It's MIT hosting it, but currently we have 13 schools around the world in this consortium, and we're working on expanding our reach. We're on 5 continents right now. I want them all. So that's my spiel. LinkedIn is the best way to connect up with me.
Great, thank you, Jean. And it looks like, yeah, your LinkedIn is in the chat box if anyone's interested. And I see a hand raised by Paul. Paul, would you like to unmute yourself?
Good morning, everybody. I know many of you, and it's a pleasure to meet the rest. In terms of science diplomacy, which I've heard mentioned several times, I want to share with this group an opportunity and a journey that is underway, has been underway for probably the last 15 years with Russia. When I was at the University of Cambridge, we convened the first formal dialogue between NATO and Russia regarding security in the Arctic Ocean. As a consequence of that initial positive outcome, the relationship with Russia has continued in very productive directions over the last 15 years. As of this week, MGIMO University in Moscow is creating a science diplomacy center. They have invited me to be its director from the United States. They have created a framework, a brand new contract framework for a non-Russian citizen to direct a center in Russia, not from Russia. And so I'm in the United States. And so the opportunity here is a real opportunity. And I welcome your collaboration, your advice, your guidance, but certainly in the spirit of being hopeful. In terms of this Science Diplomacy Center at MGIMO University, which is the only institution funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Russia, to build bridges, to think in ways that imagine the essence of what sustainable development is, operating across generations. To go beyond the politics of the moment that drives the media and the frenzies and the panic and the gloom and the doom that we faced, and to think in ways that are hopeful, recognizing that the children and the young adults today that are alive will be alive in the 22nd century. And our real responsibility is the next generation. And I see this opportunity as one of hope, but it's not something I can do myself. I serve in this as a director of a new activity, but it's a journey that is to be shared inclusively. And I welcome your collaboration. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be able to share this with you. It's brand new. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has opened the doors to Russia. I'm flying to Moscow on Friday. And I didn't believe it until I actually saw the tickets. We've been negotiating contracts for some amount of time. So it's even at this early stage when the pandemic is still throttling the world, this opportunity has emerged. So I share it with you with the spirit of inclusion.
Paul, congratulations. I'll look forward to seeing how we can help you succeed.
Thank you,
Great
Mike.
opportunity.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Paul. And do you have any, is there any website or anything like this that you can share with everyone on the call?
The germination of this activity truly was the NATO workshop in 2010 at the University of Cambridge. We had 4 ministries from Russia, including a representative to the president of the Russian Federation. All Arctic states were involved. Leaders of the in the Inuit Circumpolar Council were involved. All of the Arctic states, 17 nations at that point. And out of that came something called the Science Diplomacy Center when I was at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. I've moved the Science Diplomacy Center from Fletcher School. It's now hosted in in limbo in a sense, but now being picked up by MGIMO University. So there is a site called SciDiplo, HTTPS SciDiplo. I'll put it in the chat, that has the essence of what is anticipated with the center. Only a start, recognizing that this is intended to be inclusive. So I welcome feedback and guidance. It's intended to be hopeful for the world, and to serve as a bridge among many, but to serve as a bridge during these difficult times when consideration about strategic stability are emerging in terms of dialogues between the President of the United States and the President of Russia. It's a journey, and it's just beginning. So there's no formal website through MGIMO University. I will do it with alacrity to the best of my ability, but in the spirit of being inclusive.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that is a good segue. As I'm watching the clock, we are getting closer to the end of the webinar, and I want to give each of the speakers an opportunity to share any final conclusions or reflections that you've had from this conversation, from the speed dating, and then we will wrap things up. So would any of you three like to begin?
Well, I'll start by thanking you, Lisa and Terhi, and the entire team at Fulbright, Finland, for this. It's really important, and I hope you continue to do this. You know, you have lots of friends who would weigh in and participate, because as usual, you know, we all either speak or we are participants, right? The tables keep going like this. It just happens to be like this right now, but we've all participated when many of you have spoken. And so for the opportunities for us to keep cycling this expertise is really important. I love the fact that it came out of the Fulbright Finland's efforts, and would look forward to doing this again. I will tell you that once again, I have 2 notepads with notes on them of things that I've learned and will think about just from this. So I thank you.
I would also like to thank you, Lisa and Fulbright and everyone on this talk. And I wanted to say still a little bit about the building the partnerships, because the word trust and respect have been going around in my head all the time, because you have to have a trust, you have to build a trust. If you want to work in, there's no difference if you work with the indigenous communities or local communities or industry or businesses or other researchers. You have to build the trust. And how to build that trust? And I started to think that you obviously have to respect the people as well. You have to respect their time. You have to respect their understanding and knowledge. And you also have to respect if they say no, but at least you have tried. And I think that's one of the things that we who work in the Arctic, like we always has said many times already during this webinar, is that we are friends. But it doesn't hurt to be kind to each other. It doesn't hurt to be polite. It doesn't hurt to build that respect and trust. So that's kind of a last point I wanted to make.
No, and kiitos to our colleagues in Finland who organized this. The one thing if I were to take one message, the way this was organized, and especially the speed dating part, in how, I mean, 2 colleagues I've never met before, and it was like we've been working before for years in our conversation. And we were participant observers. You think of research methodology, we were doing this. And I think this is a proof of the experiment in how this actually works and can work. And so when people say, can you do these partnerships? That's exactly what we did. We did what we talked about, and kudos to Fulbright Finland for making this happen. And like Mike, I've got a set of notes. I'm pretty supercharged about what came out of this and the further opportunities. And to heed what Kirsi said, I mean, we are friendly. we're practical people that want to do things and seize that opportunity. But again, thank you again.
Well, a sincere thank you to our three amazing speakers, Kirsi, Greg, and Mike. We really appreciate your time and your expertise and sharing all of your experiences with us. Before we sign off, we invite you to visit our website to watch some of the recordings from the previous webinars presented in this series, and we will send you a follow-up email that includes, first and foremost, which I've been hearing from a lot of you, is the participant contact detail list. So if you did send us your consent, then you will receive that list that has emails, specializations, short bios, so that you can connect after this event. So don't let this just be a one-off event, but reach out after the event and see what other interesting partnerships can come out of it. And then also in this follow-up email, we will include a survey. So we really appreciate your feedback. If you can, spend 2 minutes on the survey to give us your thoughts on this particular event, what you liked, what could be improved in the future, we would really appreciate it. And then we will also give you the link to the recording if you want to go back to any of the discussion points. We will also be adding some of the highlights that was in the references, the Science Diplomacy Center that Paul was talking about. We'll add those links to the website. So if you want to come back to those, you can go back to our website. And we would also like to hear from you. So if something does come out of this, if some sort of new partnership comes out of this, we want to hear the success story. So feel free to get in contact with us whenever that, and if it ever happens. So on behalf of the Fulbright Finland Foundation, as well as the collaborating team at the Department of State's USA Study Abroad branch and AIEA, we thank you for joining us today. Have a great day.